Hi, good afternoon or almost afternoon, and welcome everybody to the Writers Workshop. This is the second in our series of 4 presentations. And basically the whole aspect and point of having this Writers Workshop series is to help everyone understand how to better write and communicate with the media, what's going on at their credit union, and how to kind of get your stories out there. Last week we had Peter Shankman, expert extraordinaire, on hand, and he really gave us a good breakdown on, dealing with the media and finding someone who is the person, finding the right person that you want to share that story with so that it gets out to the rest of the press. You don't want to send out something on calendar events, maybe to the editor. You want to get that into the calendar section. So it's a lot goes into finding the right person. So this week we have with us Amy Warrington from Epic Marketing, and we are actually going to go over a little bit more of the mechanics behind the press release this week. Amy's going to share with us some details and her expertise on the writing of a press release. And so without further ado, Amy, welcome. It's good to see you again. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Carol. I'm super excited to be here. It's hard following up after Peter. He gave such a good talk yesterday. So as Peter always says, only losers need PowerPoints, but I am a self-proclaimed loser. So I have a PowerPoint visual for us to use and kind of walk through. So it's easier to kind of see the different points we're going to cover. So
thanks a lot. And let me tell you, I think having the PowerPoint for this part of the discussion is going to be really helpful because people will be able to see what you're talking about. So I think having the PowerPoint in this case is really good. And I appreciate that you took the time to do it for us today.
Peter can carry things by himself. I need some help. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the anatomy of a press release. This will be for how we're going to create a formal press release, some tips on layout, and then also some tips to make it a little bit more interesting and creative. So next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start with the basics. And if you Google it, you will see that there can be anywhere from 3 to 11 to however many different elements that go into a press release. But these are the 5 main categories that you need to keep in mind. So the first, click please, is going to be your press release information. So that is the information that says that this is a press release. It's going to have your credit union logo. It's going to have the fact that it is for immediate release, or if it's not for immediate release, which you usually wouldn't do, it would say for immediate release on date. And then underneath of that, you would have the location of the news in which it was coming out of and the date of your release when it's published.
Okay, next. So Amy, if you're going, as our credit unions, they may have 3 or 4 branches. So if they're sending a press release, should they use the location as to where the headquarters is, or should they use like, this is the branch that it occurred at? What's the best thing to use there?
If it's occurring at a branch, always put it at the branch. Say that that's where it's coming from, especially if you're trying to get somebody there on location. Because if you say you're based in Boston, but your branch is somewhere down in Rhode Island, well, they're not going to know who to cover your event if you're sending out that it's the Boston one. So even though your headquarters might be there, always make sure that you're sending the journalist where the news is.
Very good. Great idea.
All right. So the next part is going to be your headlines and your subheadlines. So headlines are the attention-grabbing summary of everything we're going to be talking about in the release. But at the same time, I also don't want you to feel stymied or hindered by the idea that this title has to be so broad that it says everything and nothing at the same time. So your headline is like your subject line. It's like the headline on a newspaper. It's like that headline on an ad. You want it to be attention grabbing and you want it to be interesting. I'm sure that you have seen some interesting and uninteresting headlines in your time, Carol.
Oh yeah, we certainly have seen a few, and it's funny that it's sometimes the creativity of the writer you can see that comes through in the headlines. They really grab your attention, and then I've also seen it the other way where you see a headline and when you start reading the article, the headline had nothing to do with the article. So it's very important to kind of like clue in a little bit on that, just to give your reader a taste of what's going to be coming, I think.
Exactly. You want them to know what to expect, but you don't want to give everything away. You want it to be something that they'll be compelled to find out more information, but also a little curious as to what else might be in there. But then you also want to make sure you don't go the complete opposite direction and pick the teeny tiniest little interesting bit to focus your headline around and have it be about nothing about that at all, which is known as clickbait. So stay away from those ideas.
There you go. Now, what about using abbreviations in a headline? Like a lot of our credit unions have, rather long names. When you put their name of their credit union and tack on Federal Credit Union, that makes for a very lot of space in your headline. Is it okay to use an abbreviation in a headline, or should you always put like the proper names in the headline?
I think it's okay to sometimes not even include the name of the credit union in your headline. Sometimes getting your name out front and center is keeping you from telling what the actual news is. I would instead focus on making sure that your headline is attention grabbing. It's telling that bit of your story that's going to grab someone's eye, and whether or not your full name or only part of the name of your credit union is in there is completely dependent on whether or not that is going to help somebody be interested in the story you're telling. So for example, if you're going to put out a headline and it's going to be mostly the name of your credit union, well, I didn't even get to the end of the name of your credit union to figure out why you're asking me to look at this press release in the first place. So
Gotcha.
One of the things, so the number one thing to make sure is to grab someone's attention and grab their interest. That is the number one thing your headline is used for. That's the first thing that you need to get them past. So like when you're setting up a website, when you're doing anything in marketing, there's a lot of barriers to entry. So this first barrier to entry is your headline. That's the first thing people see. It's the first thing that's going to either catch their attention or completely make them blow past. So if you can make a really good headline that's really, really interesting, that person is going to be far more likely to continue reading your release. Same with your subheads. Try to make sure that if you are using a subheadline, which I recommend you do, you're bringing out that next really important or interesting bit of information that's going to inspire somebody to continue reading on.
Okay,
Amy, Carol, this is Walter. Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
Sure.
When you look at headlines, a lot of times I see news releases where it would be something similar to like, CCUA announces the winners, CCUA donates, blah, 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 CCUA, where it's always the focus is on the organization and then whatever it is. Tell me what your thoughts are about those kind of headlines, because I don't know, my feeling is like that's bland. Like you're saying, if you're going to catch attention, you want to, if CCUA is announcing the winners, I think the focus of that headline should be more toward the winners. And then maybe in the subtitle, you could put, CCUA's awards program, highlights or spotlights 5 winners or whatever it is. But, because to me, it's not just about getting, consumers' attention, but you're really looking to differentiate yourself with the press and the news media and the reporters, and make them want to go like, whoa, what's that about? Let me, and so because a lot of times too, you guys, when you go to a website of an organization, they might have a news page where all the releases are, and you can see and then you can see everyone, and it's like, oh my God, all they're doing is just focusing on their company's name. Like that's the way to do it. And I don't know, I don't know, maybe if you could share some thoughts on that.
My one thought about that is just because that's how everybody always does it doesn't mean it's the right way to do something. And as you put it exactly right, everybody always does that, and they focus on the name and they focus on this and they focus on that, not necessarily because it's wrong, but because that's kind of how it's been ingrained, that that's how you do it and that's how public relation works. But the real reason that we put out these headlines and we put out these press releases is to get attention. And sometimes when you're in a position where you're focused on your company, your organization, what you're doing, it's very easy to get into that rut and that mindset of putting the organization name first, making sure this is here, and forget that the real reason you're putting out this release is to get coverage from the press. And the way that you can get coverage from the press is by having a really interesting story that reporter knows will resonate with its audience. And the way that you do that is by writing your press release so that it catches attention, it's interesting to the reporter, and that reporter is then intrigued and wants to continue learning more and actually telling your story as well. So we'll move. There's a bunch more about headlines and subheadlines. I get into these a little bit more detail, but all of this is great. So let's get into the body. So the next part we want to talk to is the body release of your copy. So this is also where a lot of times you see some mistakes that people make because they are just so used to putting their company first. So I know that I used to work very closely with, I don't know if I can say the name of the company, but so they used to say that blank company name, a leader in petrochemical refinery and blah, 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 blah. And they had this whole long thing that they put at the start of every single press release they ever do. You can go through all of them. It's there. And they say that has, and then they say whatever their news is. But that's not interesting. Just because that's how they set up every single one of their press releases doesn't mean that's the right way to set up their press release. So make it count. The first few sentences of your release need to grab attention, need to pique interest, and need to stoke the curiosity of the reporter. Same with your headline, same with every other thing you've done. Your purpose is to make it interesting. And we always say to try to include quotes, because quotes are a great way to further your storytelling and also bring in a human element, especially with stories that might not be very human when you're first looking at them, like financial reports and the like. So make sure that you're also keeping your press release short and to the point. Traditionally, press releases aren't supposed to be more than 400 to 600 words. So you want to try to make sure they're shorter than one page, that they have all the relevant information that is on, like, that the reporter really needs to know, and that you close it. And then the next thing is your boilerplate. And this is where then you can put the information that's about your credit union. You do not need to worry about putting that information up in the front of the release. There is a built-in place for this to go. That is where you're going to have all of that high-level information that you want people to know. Like, we are ABC Credit Union. We serve the areas of Boston, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. We have, we started as a basis for, the auto industry, whatever it is that your boilerplate is, that key information that you want somebody to know about your credit union, that goes in your boilerplate. So you don't have to worry about wasting your headline real estate, your subheadline real estate, or even your body real estate talking about that info, because it already has a spot. So focus on keeping the news in those 2 through 3. That all about the news. Don't worry about trying to get your name in there as often as you possibly can. There's a space for that. And then the next section that you need to include is going to be the contact information. So whoever your media contact is, make sure that there are ways to get in touch with them, and make sure that that information is accurate. There are other elements that you can add into your press release to make it a lot more complete, to make it more robust, and we'll get to those in later slides. But at its most basic, these are all of the elements that you need to create a press release, but not necessarily a successful one because of everything we talked about.
Yeah, these are the great, like you said, basics. I mean, these are the things that now I'm putting on my daily scan hat, speaking as someone who gets press releases. This is the information that I'm kind of looking for when it comes over and across to us. So I've always seen it, and not always, I mean, it depends on the publication, but I've noticed that a lot of times what people will do is they'll take that first opening paragraph of the body and just rework the headline and the subheadline into that, and then go on with the rest of the story. Is that kind of a standard thing to do, or do you feel that since you've already talked about that you should go on with further details about whatever the headline's about?
You should go on with further details of whatever the headline is about. There is only so much space that you get to tell this story, and the more you spend repeating yourself, the more the person reading it is going to wonder if there is anything else left in this story for them to read, or if they're just going to be reading what you've already told them over and over again. So make sure that you're telling compelling stories, that you're leading the reporter down the path, and that you're giving them all the relevant information that they need. I mean, if you repeat things, if you put the name of your credit union in your title, if you're doing these things, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that these are things that if you've always done it this way and you've always been getting the same results and you're not seeing people picking up your stories as often as you'd like, these are some new ideas and some ways to maybe mix it up. So if we go to the next slide.
So Amy, while he's switching slides, I just want to point out that whoever is the contact information there, you also want to make sure that they know you sent the press release out, because maybe you're writing it and sending it, but they're the media person that people contact. Somebody calls them for more information and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So you really need to have, whoever is that contact person needs to know about that event or, about the press release that went out.
Especially if you're making the contact person somebody besides your press release person, like you said, like your CEO or your chief marketing officer or somebody who's in charge of this event that you're talking about, but they might not necessarily be expecting press to be giving them a call with questions. So make sure that, yes, that's a very good point. Whoever you are having the media contact is fully aware that they will be contacting them and why, and provide them talking points.
There you go. And I know you had said that, like keeping the words to, 500 words or less or something like that. But is it like you need to stay within a certain length, or can you write a little bit longer? Or should you like send a shorter something, and then if the publication wants to do more in-depth, they can contact you for a longer one? Is there any guideline as to that? I mean, is one page enough?
There are no hard and fast rules anymore when it comes to putting a press release out on the wire. The rules that existed before, and the reason you have those hash marks at the end, are because when it used to go out, they needed to have an indication of what was allowed to be published, what the information needed to go out. Then you'd have your hash marks, and then you would have some other information, such as who was available to speak when, your media contact information, and things that you didn't want to be published. Because there was only so much space to send out this amount of news, that's why you had to stay within certain guidelines. But those guidelines are still important to keep in mind. Reporters are busy. They have a bunch of stuff to do. If you have a huge story that has a lot of components to it, I don't recommend making your press release 2, 3, 4, 5 pages long. Nobody's going to read it. I still recommend keeping it very short, keeping it very concise and to the point, but including additional links so that they can find more information elsewhere, or creating what we know as a media kit. And a media kit is kind of like a press release on steroids. So the media kit can allow you to include videos. It can allow you to include multiple quotes, multiple images, more background about whatever it is that your piece of news is. But that's a completely different animal than a press release. When you're doing a press release, you really want to keep things concise. You really want to make sure that you're getting the important news out there, but that you're not taking advantage of someone's time. And that there are other avenues and tools that you can use that will probably be better suited for what your purpose is if you have bigger news to share. So you can send that press release, keep it short, then link to your media kit and let them know that they can find more information and tools to put together their story if they're interested by following this link to your more robust media kit.
Okay, so you had mentioned wire. For anybody who's not quite up on what is the wire, basically?
I've asked that question of every single person who has tried to sell me on putting out press releases on the wire. And the answer is, it's not an answer anymore. So the wire used to be something. It used to be important, and it used to be the way that businesses were able to get out news to reporters. I guess think of the telegraph, but more robust than the telegraph. It was just a way for people to get news out quickly to reporters who were following news, and they wanted to be able to see things that popped up. Now, though, because it's digital and because things are different, every wire, I guess, is set up differently, and you will pay different prices for the privilege of using those different wires. But
so basically, it's kind of like a news service where you send a press release to this company, and
yes,
this company sends it out to all of the newspapers based on whatever criteria you might have,
yes,
whether it's about a technical issue or whether it's,
yes,
a community issue. They'll pick the papers that they'll send it to for you.
yes. and how those arrive in inboxes and what they look like and the level of journalists that will be seeing them or viewing them is all dependent on the wire service that you choose to use. So you can send out a press release on Business Wire that reaches all across the United States and hits these different things, and you can spend over $2,000 for one press release. Or you can use a free to almost no fee service for that same press release, and it'll be $49. The value and the difference that they sell you on is the level of reporter that it reaches and the higher caliber publication and the more respect that that wire has. And that's.
But if you have, like Peter was saying, if you have established and cultivated that relationship with your local paper and your local news media, so you can just send it to them yourself and don't pay any fees.
Exactly.
And in all circumstances, you may have a better chance of them picking it up because they have that personal relationship with you.
You 100%, you 1,000,000% have a better chance of a personal relationship that you have with a reporter having your news get picked up. For those people, we say pitch to them, which means you can still have your press release. Your press release is still important, but instead of just putting it out on a wire, which is going to send to all these people and hope somebody picks it up, when you are pitching to somebody personal, you're drawing on your relationship with them. You're reminding them of past stories that you've written, past value you guys have added to each other, why this is relevant for them. And then you're giving them that press release and that story, and they're far more likely to pick it up because of that relationship, because of their knowledge of what you guys already do. So sending out those personal pitches with an attached press release is a lot better for what you're trying to accomplish than just blithely sending it out on a wire, regardless of how much you pay to put it on a wire.
Okay, I got one more question, and then we'll let you kind of get to the meat of your slide there.
You
said that you're sending it kind of like you're sending it out as an attachment. So we're sending a Word doc, Adobe PDF. Should we include the copy in the email itself? I mean, I know my own self, I don't necessarily have a lot of time to open a bunch of attachments. And then some companies, you know how the darn, security is, maybe you can't even open attachments, So what's the best way, or just a multitude of ways?
So the answer is there's a multitude of ways. So if you have a relationship with a reporter and you know that they don't like being emailed, you wouldn't email them. You would tweet them or however you want to get in touch with them. So for those reporters that you have those unique relationships with, I can't tell you the best way to send the press release to them because you're going to know how to do that. When you're reaching out blindly to people, there are services that you can use. And in those services, you can have your pitch and then you can have the press release in the body of the email, or you can have it as an attachment. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. If you're going to be sending a press release out on a wire, you're not going to be sending a personalized email to that person anyway. Some services will allow you to choose people that you want to send a personalized pitch to, and they will format that with your pitch, and then they will include your press release in the email. I don't want to say that there's one better way than the other. You're right, things with attachments can get locked in spam filters, but in all honesty, you shouldn't be reaching out blind to a reporter for the first time with a press release anyway. If this is somebody that you're reaching out to via email or one-on-one with this personalized pitch, you should have already tried to establish a connection with them beforehand. You should have already tried to speak with them, and you should know how they prefer to receive things from you just based on your due diligence. If you put everything in the body of the email, you remove that one barrier to entry of them having to open an attachment or attachment getting lost, which is great. But I wouldn't try to make anything too crazy fancy, just because the more likelihood there could be of, I don't know. I wouldn't try to put like a bunch of pictures, a bunch of this, a bunch of that in your email. Try and keep it simple. Put your pitch in there. Either copy and paste the body of your press release in the email or attach it, but don't go crazy and try to send them millions of links and millions of pictures. Give them enough to pique their interest and have them get back to you, or have it packaged in a way so that it is easy to send all of this stuff. But the more you try to, it's kind of, I don't want to tell you not to send this stuff, but at the same time, like, don't overload your emails, and don't, make sure that when you are packaging your everything together, it makes sense when you send it. But
Right.
I think I answer these questions a little bit better later
Yeah.
on. So let's move to the next slide, please. I'm not really sure if I am understanding what your real questions are too. So number one thing, be great at the basics, because no matter what you're putting out, you need to make sure that it's professional and that it's well done. So always double check your data. Always make sure that your images and your videos and everything have your proper captions and your alt tags. So make sure that when you're putting everything together, it's put together in a way that makes sense and is correct and is well produced. And then always make sure that you get a fresh set of eyes on your press release for a QA and proofread before submission. So when you're putting together this press release, you want to make sure that you have thought through all the different things that you're going to need to include, and then we'll talk about some more things that we can include in a bit. But doing all of this foundational groundwork on your press release and making sure it is well thought out and well planned is going to save you a lot of agita later when you're reaching out to reporters. So next slide, please. So this is where we talked about headlines a little bit in the beginning and how you were asking some of those questions. And this is a slide that's a little bit more about those headlines and the fresh perspective in writing those. So my example here is ABCFCU releases 2021 annual report. How many times have you gotten a headline, Carol, that's very, very similar to that?
Oh, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you know what's going to be in there. You know the information that's going to be, and it makes sense. But it's also one that you see all the time, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah. And about the same time of year, you get them from, 80, 90 credit unions, or something like that. So it becomes like almost a question of, should you do one annual reports are released and then just do links to the the individual things? It's kind of like, what are you going to do?
Right, exactly. Where's the news? What's so important about ABC credit union over XYZ credit union, But if you were to see the headline, a strong third quarter in savvy investments boost their 2021 projections, that's a little bit more interesting to look at and maybe see what happened or see what went on during the year. So trying to see beyond what the main story is, because yes, your headline should be a summary. Yes, it should tell what is going to be contained in your press release, but find that interesting nugget, find that hook, find that piece of information that's going to set you apart from everybody else who's also talking about your 2021 annual report type thing. Figure out how you can feed on either people's emotions. Emotional words are always good. Hopes, aspirations, things that are good, things that, make people feel something are always good to try and put in there. Always try to appeal to that human nature of people and pique that curiosity and make them more interested to see what else is in there. The next slide.
Hey, Amy, this is Walter again, the voice from
beyond,
behind the curtain.
but I have to apologize, because obviously, you got this exactly where we want to go with this.
You guys threw me off with your questions early.
Yeah, because look at here's what you have. Rather than just saying, the company releases, you're showing this is the better way to do it. A strong third quarter and savvy investments boosts the credit union's 2021 projections. Perfect.
And it's also to kind of highlight that there is no one right way to do it. There is no one right headline. There's going to be a bunch of different options that you can use, and being able to allow yourself to be creative and try some of those out is how you're going to figure out what really works for your credit union and your voice and the reporters that you're interacting with.
So another, I don't want to say a question or whatever, but maybe a comment. You spend the time and you get your headline together, you get your subhead, you get your copy. Now, how should you feel, or should you feel like you send it out and maybe they put a different headline on it, or they pick out just only parts of your release and don't include the whole body? How should you feel if the editor makes some changes to what you sent?
but I got the editor's attention and he published me. He didn't publish my exact words, but I still got my credit union out there. They're still in the, in the eye of the public, and that's great. That's awesome. That is amazing feeling.
And maybe take clues from the changes that were made in how you're going to present your next, send your next submission to them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the example is or what that kind of shakes out to, but in one respect, what you did worked. You got somebody's attention and you were able to get published. In another respect, they changed kind of what you did, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was for good or for bad. So take a look at what the changes were, see if what they did makes sense. If how they switched it made it more interesting to you, then yeah, see if you can make things even more interesting when you send them out. If they changed it and went back to like the traditional thing, well, did you get picked up for this last year? Did you even changing things around have anything to really do with you getting picked up or not? So kind of take a look at the whole equation, see everything that may have led to or hindered you getting this coverage, and then learn from that and see how you can extrapolate that data to make a better decision moving forward for your next release.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
All right, the next slide, please. Okay, so this is another part that we kind of talked about earlier, making sure that you aren't giving away that valuable attention-grabbing real estate just to cover the things that you think you should be covering in the release, because that's always what you've been told to add in the beginning of a release, or that's like the standard and what you're supposed to do. Rules change all the time. It's what you're supposed to evolve with them. If everybody does the same thing, it's not fun anymore. So many institutions, put their corporate descriptor in that first paragraph, but don't do that. So instead of APC FCU, Newcastle County's largest area credit union, is proud to announce our partnership with a local app developer, you can try instead switching it around, and you can still get those zings in there. So banking just got better for members of Newcastle County's largest credit union. We didn't say which credit union it was, but okay, members, the largest credit union, that's a lot more people than other places it might affect. And an innovative new mobile app, wow, what can they do that now? Like, why is this interesting? Let me read on a little bit more. It just catches your attention. It lets you know a little bit more about what's coming, and you're not wasting your time on information that you're going to get to, but you want to get to it now, instead of like seeing that information. It's like, okay, great, but why do I care? Does that make a little bit more sense?
Okay. Yeah. And giving it a different spin. I like kind of your example there. I know we get a tremendous amount of news that comes through, and it includes is proud, is excited, is happy, and it's kind of like, you wouldn't be sending me this if you weren't any of those things. Right. So a lot of times, we've got limited space that we can put things into the scan. So, I'll pull out some of those things, because maybe later in the article, then you have the CEO who comes with his quote and says, we are so proud to help these people. Well, you've got your proud there in the quote. Exactly. So you really don't need it up to the front. Again, it's like using your real estate valuably, and not reiterating things, throughout your release as well. So I think that's a good thing to kind of put out there. And it does grab your attention more. Banking got better. It's kind of like, all right, so how did it get better? All right, so with the launch of the new mobile app, which to me is more interesting than saying we have another partnership.
Right, because, okay.
To get,
so
just the way that it's presented makes such a difference.
It does. And it's not to say that you shouldn't be mentioning your credit union. You absolutely should be having your credit union's name in there. That's very important. But what's more important, getting your credit union's name in there or what the news is? So just always keep that in mind. What's the news? What do I want people to know? They already see my logo, so they know it's coming from me. But what is it that I actually am trying to tell them, and what is going to make them interested in what I have to say? And it's easy when you're in that position where you're working in the credit union, like that is all you think about, all you know, and it's very easy to get into that. Well, we are really excited about this, and we think that, and we are so pumped to offer this to our members because we care about them. Awesome. We know that. but what is going to make me care about this app? Why is it awesome? What does it do for your members? What's the actual news besides how you feel about it?
And what makes it different than every other app that every other, bank is offering? Has this got some kind of a new twist to it, or, maybe it's a lot easier to read, or especially if it's a new and improved app for yourself. You've made some changes based on what the membership wants. We're giving you what you've asked for. Very important to share that out there as to why this app is different and what makes it better, than anybody else's. Or if it's the very first one that no one else is using, well, then you are innovative, and that definitely needs to be, blasted out to the members.
Yep. And if you found out
potential members
changes from from feedback from your members, say, based on feedback by our members, these changes were implemented and make sure that you are putting out the value to the people who are going to be reading this article, not necessarily the value you as the credit union are getting. And we all know it's going to be self-serving for you, or you wouldn't have been taking the time and effort to put the news out there. But make sure that you're focused on why it's important for the other people who are going to be reading this article.
Yeah, and I kind of just mentioned real briefly in passing there too. This is going to the news. It's not going in your or you could put it in your newsletter as well that goes to your members, but a press release is going to be seen by people who are not your members.
Right.
So you need to kind of let them know why they should be your member. Let them say, hey, well, maybe I should be that, because, I need to check them out because I want something that does that. But at the same time, because it is going out to people who, are maybe not familiar with credit unions, you might not want to use all of the jargon, that goes with credit unions. Somewhere along the line, I think everybody probably knows what an ATM is by now. But when they first came out, it could have been anything, So I think it's important somewhere to kind of spell out what this is. And then if you want to use those, initials and everything later, then that's great. But for someone who doesn't understand what a credit union is or doesn't know what your credit union's about, you want to be clear in what you're saying to them so that they can understand why this would be a benefit for them to become one of your members.
Right, exactly. Why is this news? Why should you care? That's exactly right. So then that brings me to my next point for the next slide. So this is kind of what I was saying before when you were asking me, how are we supposed to send this out to people? Do I put it in the body of my email? Do I put it as an attachment? What do I do? When you're putting it out on the wire, if you're putting it out through a wire service, you are limited to what that wire service allows you to do. Some of the more expensive ones allow you to do more. Some of the free to the cheaper ones allow you to do less. But that's what I was trying to get at by saying that the wire, it's all digital now. So you have far more opportunity to go beyond that basic press release that we showed you on the first, well, technically second slide. And you can include links, you can include videos, you can include images, but to also keep in mind that because you can do this, don't waste the opportunity on things that don't matter. Just because you can include a link to a video doesn't mean you're like, oh, well, we made that video 3 weeks ago that was really kind of cool, but has nothing to do with this, but let's show it to them anyway. No, that's not what this is for. It's not, we are putting out a new product about checking, but let's cross promote these loans. That's a marketing campaign. That's not what this is about. If you are going to be adding information, if you're going to be adding images, videos, all of this, make sure that it is furthering your story. Make sure that it is pertinent to the reporter and that you're not wasting time. So think through like you would anything. Don't think of a press release as a one-off. Think of it as a valuable boat for all of your content. So there's a bunch of different things that went into whatever this piece of news is. So make sure that your press release is putting main points right up front and getting that attention, and that it's including elements that further the story in a cohesive way, just like any marketing campaign would. And then the last slide, the last piece of advice is what we've been saying all day, what Peter said all last week kind of is It's the job of a public relations professional to make the reporter's life easier, because if they do not make the reporter's life easier, then they cannot do the stuff that is in their job description, which is getting press, getting media coverage, getting interviews, putting the credit union in a good position in the community. They can't do any of that if they don't make reporters' lives easier, because reporters will want to cover them, they'll want to reach out to them, and they'll want to, pick up your stories, and they'll come to you more often with press and opportunities because they know you make their lives easier. So always anticipate what their needs are going to be. Try to make sure that when you are thoughtfully creating these press releases, when you're thinking about these links and these images and these videos, that you're anticipating what the reporter is going to need and you're providing it to them from the start. So, and then always make sure that the information is from end to end. You are not leaving anything out, but you're also not adding superfluous things in that don't need to be there. You have a story, tell that story. Don't worry about trying to throw in 1,000,001 things, because you're going to dilute it. Stick to the message and make sure you come to your point well. And also the direct why should you care connection with their readers. And make sure that when you're sending out this press release, when you're telling the story, that you're not focused on why it's good for the credit union, that you're focused on why it's good for the person who's going to read the story that the reporter writes. And I think that's all I have right
now. And we'll just kind of backspace a little bit, because I know you talked about, you have these basic elements for your press release. So if we have those 5 things in there, pretty much we've got everything covered.
Yes.
And I know that one of them was that you wanted to have the information in there. Now, I do know that a lot of times you can kind of make like a little template up, basically, to make sure you include all those things. And I know there's a tendency, myself included, when you have such a template, that you just kind of bring it up, and now we'll go in and put in the new information. Make sure, especially if you do that you have someone else take a look at that, because a lot of times somewhere along the line you may forget. You may put the new headline, but the subhead was left from the other article, or you could have a picture inserted that doesn't go with what you're talking about now, or a link could be wrong. Check your contact information again, make sure that's still up to date. And this is a good place. I wouldn't say every single time you send a release, but at least once or twice a year, check your boilerplate information, because especially if you're included, like how many members you have or what your asset size is, that changes. So you want to make sure you have the most current information in there for the reporter. They don't want the wrong information, like you were saying. So you want to make sure that all of that's up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. And most importantly, when you are QAing, make sure you get a fresh set of eyes. It is so easy to read the same mistake over and over again, especially when you wrote it, because you know what it's supposed to say, and you know what it's supposed to be. But getting somebody with a fresh set of eyes to look at it is going to be able to pick out things that you were just used to seeing, so you skimmed over, you glossed over, you didn't even notice anymore. So try to make sure you get a fresh set of eyes. And if you absolutely can't get a fresh set of eyes, if you're the only person who can work on it and the only resource you have, give yourself a few hours away from it. And when you come back, read everything out loud. It sounds silly, but reading things out loud and trying to have that focus and both saying it and hearing it, it helps you if there's not a good flow. It helps you to see if there's a mistake in there, and it just brings things into sharper relief. So give yourself some time away from it, because you can't stare at something for hours and hours and hours and expect things to change in your mind. You got to have some space and then read it out loud.
Yeah, like that commercial, you kind of go nose blind.
Yes,
if you're looking at the same thing over and over, you do need a fresh set of eyes or some time away, and then go back and take a look at it again.
Yeah, and that's the same with everything you do. I mean, it's always, 2 heads are always better than one, especially when you're trying to be creative, especially when you're trying out something, you're trying to grab somebody's interest and attention. If you don't have a coworker to bounce it off of, what about a friend or a spouse or, somebody else? Just run those ideas. If they find it interesting, if they want to learn more, go for a mean friend who's honest with you, actually. But get that feedback from other people. And if they're like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, see if they're interested. Sometimes I'll send a text to my friend pretending it's a link to something. And if they're like, what the heck was that? Why'd you send me? I tried to click it, but I couldn't get there. Then I know it was interesting. If they never mentioned it to me, I know they didn't look at it. So,
that's a good way to do that.
Yeah, it's always good to trick your friends into helping you do things.
Well, heck yeah. That's free labor too, right? So that's always a good thing. So I also want to point out another area,
Okay.
and because we do so much sending of the press now by email, is when you're sending your email, make sure your subject in your email itself kind of matches up to what you're sending. I've had that come through before too, where I don't know, maybe somebody has like all of their press contacts entered in an email, so they just kind of like go in and use the same email and put new stuff, and didn't check that subject line. I've had that come across a couple times. I'll like get the subject and I'm kind of like, okay, and I open it up and it has nothing to do with what the subject was about.
Right.
I mean, absolutely nothing. So I'm kind of like, well, they must have just,
Copy and paste.
Again, copy and pasted and like that. And then speaking with an editor's hat again, when you're sending out something that has pictures in it, and it's fine if you put them in the body of your release as well, but also send the pictures separately. Because
Yes.
a lot of times the picture quality that comes through is not so good when we try and grab it out of your email or out of something. We need, a little bit quality, better pixels, that kind of stuff. And include all the information you can about who is in the pictures.
Always make sure
we don't know who these people are.
Exactly. And, if you need to give credit to the photographer, if you need to, make sure that you say who is included in all the captions, all those alt tags, make sure that all of that is done so you provide that complete information. Because there's nothing worse than a reporter wanting to run a story, having everything except, and then they have to go back to you and they have to ask that question because you didn't provide it. And now, you know what? Not worth the story, not worth making the deadline. You didn't make it in time. So yes, make sure that you double check your captions, your alt tags, everything is included.
Right. And from personal experience, I do want to say it. I've noticed that in my previous life as a marketing director at one of our credit unions, that I seemed to get a lot more press time when I included pictures of people, local people, included like, this was Carol from Magnolia. And that might get in over just a picture that says a group of people were at the meeting. It's kind of like they want to see some names. They want to see where people are from. I think that the reporters, they know that people like to see themselves in the press, or they like to see their friends and family, and then they're going to be like, hey, did you see yourself in the paper? So it gets them some traction as well, including that. But it seemed like whenever I included the pictures with an event, that those events got published. Whereas if I just sent just a press release and no pictures, then, maybe I might have got a blurb, but I got better coverage with the pictures. So, always bear in mind, especially if now that we're kind of like getting back into live events, so to speak, if you're having a shred event, or if you're having, an open house at a credit union or something like that, make sure you get some pictures of what's going on at the event. It's easier to take a lot of pictures and then narrow down which ones to send than not take any pictures and wish you had something from it. So, always send a couple pictures if you're doing an event type of thing. Makes it a lot more interesting.
And always try to make sure to send those pictures that are like actionable or exciting or have something going on. If you're sending a press release, try not to just make it a headshot of a person that you're talking about the press release about. Show them doing something. Show them like having fun. Like show something interesting in your images. Yes, very good point. It's the same across social, across everything. You get more attention when you have a really good image or photo to go with it.
Right, and that's kind of bears in mind. It's like, okay, credit unions out there, think GAC. The government affairs conference that we have, what is the one thing that you see like all the time? Everybody who's visiting is all lined up in a row, and you have to get so far back that you can't see anybody because you've got 40 people. Group out some people to make smaller, more intimate pictures, or, come up with a drone picture if you want to take a giant shot or something like that. It's like everybody lined up.
Yes, like how many people do you see with like those wedding photos where, okay, you have the groom and you have the bridesmaids and everything, and it's great. But then you see those other ones that are really fun and really different. And those are the ones that go viral, like the people who had the fake velociraptor photoshopped in the background. Like, some fun ways that you can use your pictures instead of just, this is our group, these are who they are in the front row and the back row. Don't think yearbook, think Or if you do think yearbook, think like those action shots where you're looking through and you're like, oh yeah, there I am. Look at me working on this project or whatever. Try and make sure that your images are helping tell that story and they're not just an image for image sake.
Exactly. So I know that everybody was invited to ask questions throughout. I haven't seen a whole. I've tried to address the questions as they came up. So if anybody has any additional questions, we've got about 10 minutes before we wrap up. If you have additional questions or comments that you'd like to share in your successes in getting out your press releases, something that you've seen that's really worked for you, please feel free to put it in the message board. And for you, Amy, this message board is on our website where they're actually viewing the presentation. So you're not going to see it in the chat room on this product that we're using, this StreamYard that we're using.
Well, hey, Carol,
I have someone saying we've had some great tips and thanking us. So we're happy. We're full of tips.
You're full of tips. I want to hear like some of your favorite headlines or something.
Some kind of headline that's caught your attention.
Let me ask this of you guys for your comment. A lot of times, let's say CCUA, our association, will do an essay contest or a scholarship contest, and there's a number of winners, let's say, from throughout the state. Sometimes you'll have somebody at a particular credit union will, maybe look to us to send out a release to all the local newspapers throughout the state. Okay. But my feeling there is, and maybe you guys chime in what your thoughts are. My feeling is that for a local community newspaper, I think they will more readily run the news of so and so from the same town where the newspaper is that won the scholarship and from the credit union in that town than from a big organization that may not even be in that state itself. I mean, can you offer some comments on that?
So it's the same with everything else in marketing. Know your audience and know who you're targeting and make sure that you're changing your message so that it's most likely to resonate with that target audience. So who says that you only have to do one press release and you can only send out the same press release everywhere? If you have different stories to tell and it makes more sense to rearrange it so that when you send it to this newspaper, it's better suited for them than this newspaper, do it. Like change that around. Make sure that when you're sending to, I don't know, the Cecil Wig, where I grew up in Maryland, and, homegirl Amy Warrington won an award, that's great. But if you're going to send it to the, what's a Delaware newspaper, then we're going to talk about my friend Marcy Brown, who won the award but grew up in Delaware. So you want to try to make sure that if you are trying to reach out to multiple people, don't get lazy. Like, your job is to get the news, and you need to make sure that you're working as hard as you can for the reporter to give it to them in a way that's going to make sense for them. So go the extra effort, do that extra step, and you'll see that it'll probably be rewarded for doing just that.
Yeah, you can highlight, like Amy said, you can highlight somebody who is in your local area, and always include the among the winners, or was among, and then that way they know that it's not just the one person. So that's great. But again, it's one of those things where if you're dealing with your local hometown paper, they want they want to see people and hear about people from the local hometown area. That local paper, down in, I'm going to say Smyrna, Delaware, is not going to be interested in, who won the scholarship up in Massachusetts. It's great up there, but it is not going to do anything for the people in Smyrna. However, if they say, so-and-so from Smyrna was one of the winners of, and then you can talk about, it was a Massachusetts award or something like that, that's great. But at least, tie it down to them and why it would be interesting for them. Real quick, I just want to point out, we've been talking about releases that are going out after the event. You can also send like a news release that event is coming, and it kind of like invites a reporter to come and cover your event. So if you're having a shred event, if you're having, some kind of a meeting or an educational fair or something like that, and you want to nothing could be better than to get the reporter there and let the reporter kind of cover it themselves, because then they know what they want to have in there. So, feel free to reach out and let people know when these events are happening. in your local area. And just make sure that you give them all the pertinent information. When the event is, what time it is, where it's going to be at. Again, who should they contact? That type of thing. A lot of times you'll send something like that out and the reporter will say, or the editor will send something back and say, we'll have a reporter there. Mm-hmm. But you just have to make sure that they know that this is going on. So, don't forget about the beforehand as well as the afterhand. We've got about 5 minutes.
Reporters like events and fun things as much as the next person. So, when you are trying to get them out to their event, make it personal, make it fun, make them want to come and be there. You can tell them, I'll save you a candy, we'll give you some free cotton candy if you come out and cover us or something. Like when you're pitching them, pitch it, make it fun, make them want to come to your event. Don't just be like, hi, we request the honor of you to come and cover us at this red event. It's like, make it fun. Make people want to come to your events and have fun with you. All right. I'm sorry, I interrupted you though, Carol. You wanted to get in one more thing.
No, I was just going to say we've got about 4 minutes left. If anybody has any questions, or again, if there's a tactic that you've taken in getting your press releases out that's worked for you, and you want to share that, we'd be happy to let your idea go out there. We will be making a record. This, of course, has been recorded. We will be making the recording available, and it's going to join last week's presentation with Peter Shankman right underneath where you're viewing it on the page right now for our members. Log into the member portal, and you're going to find the recordings right in that section right underneath. But it is in our member portal, so you are going to have to be a member and have the ability to access into that. Amy's presentation, in addition to this week's session being recorded, we're also going to put her slideshow in there for you too, for a resource for you too. So thank you very much for that, Amy. We really appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Walter, you have any final kind of comments out from behind the curtain?
I was going to say, Carol, Amy, great conversation and a lot of very, very good tips. Absolutely. Totally valuable, particularly for folks and trying to, get news out about their credit union and how active and engaging the credit union is in the community. I think one thing to go along with this is to get back to what you were saying earlier, Carol. If you're inviting the news media to cover an event at the credit union, well, if you're going to probably have a photog that's going to show up to get a photo for the newspaper or something of that sort. You got to kind of stage something or think like the reporters that would make the story interesting, because you just don't want to have two people standing there with the small little check. That's why a lot of times you see the big checks in making the presentation. But better yet, when you're making the presentation with the check, rather than one CEO presenting it to the other CEO, maybe have the kids that are part of that organization receiving that check, or the director or the fireman in the fire helmet or something, or doing it at the firehouse. So you want to think with the visual that makes it exciting and interesting. And I also think what you guys were saying is that the more you do things like this and establish that, let's say, quote, cred, with the reporters, when they say, geez, every time I go to Amy's credit union, she has, the kids are there doing it. She finds, they're going to want to come and cover you because they know that you're giving them some really hot stuff,
Exactly.
That's the key.
And, the tough part that a lot of professionals that are in marketing and public relations find is that a lot of times it's really hard to quantify and qualify how important public relations is and how much time is required to really do a good job at it. It's not just, I'm going to write a press release, we're going to get all of this press and it's going to happen overnight. It takes so much work and so much time and investment. So if you are just trying to start out in public relations, if this is like, you've been told you need to do PR, but it's only part of your job, I understand. It's so frustrating and it's so hard. And there's so much that time that you need to invest that you're not always given to the time to do. But try and work in that creativity where you can. Try and make sure that you're thinking outside the box and doing as much as you can for the reporter. And, eventually, hopefully, public relations in your credit union will be able to see that light of more budget and more time and more consideration for when you go to do it. But I understand public relations is always the redheaded stepchild. It never gets the respect and the attention it deserves. And people think that it's a really easy thing to do, and it's not. And so for all of you guys that are out there trying to do your PR and struggling, everyone's struggling. I struggle with it. Peter struggles with it. Peter pretends he doesn't, but he wasn't always Peter Shankman. He had to work at the bottom too. So just keep plugging away and keep trying, because the only way to be successful is to make mistakes and fail. So keep failing and fail spectacularly, and then just do better next time.
You know, maybe we have to get you guys back to talk a little bit about the distinction between marketing, advertising, and public relations.
Well, because it's becoming grayer and grayer and grayer as time goes on.
Yes, but a lot of times you'll see, let's say, and you know, in my past career, you'll get CEOs that'll say, why isn't the newspaper saying this about us? You know, when you do a news release or whatever it is. Well, if you want that sort of thing where this is exactly how it should appear in the paper, then buy an advertisement. That's what advertisements are. So you could say exactly what you want.
That's an advertorial, not an editorial.
Yes.
That's the difference.
That's right. But the thing is, what's so beautiful about PR is, just like you say, Amy, you know, when you're doing releases and putting stuff out there, I mean, that's free publicity, and you get to shape the brand, the image, public image of the organization through a lot of what you're doing.
Free publicity, but it costs a lot in sweat equity. That's for sure.
Yeah, because you know, my contention is a lot of credit unions really don't understand PR. They understand marketing and advertising, but when it comes to public relations, no, public relations is work, but it's worth the. I always refer to public relations and doing what we do as kind of like fertilizing the ground, seeding the ground, so that then you could go in with marketing and advertising to make the sale or to produce or promote the products. But you need to create that image first, that identity, and that's where PR comes in.
Yeah, and they all kind of work hand in hand to like help promote all of those different things. So it's all of them have their uses and their purpose, but then they all also should be talking to each other and working with each other and being part of a larger, high level like idea to bring things to life. And they all have their purpose and they all have their place. And I hope PR gets the respect it deserves one of these days from marketing vendors.
Well, thank you again, Amy. We really appreciate your expertise and your willingness to share it with us. Next week, folks, I just want to remind everybody that next week the Writers Workshop is moving to Thursday at 11 o'clock. And so now you know how you're going to put things together and who you're going to put them to. But now the problem becomes, what am I going to talk about? So next week's issue will bring that up. We're going to have on hand how to share your credit union story. That's going to be our big topic next week. Again, that's going to be at 11 o'clock on Thursday. So make sure you mark your calendars right. Thank you again, Amy. Thank you, Walter. Thank you all for joining us. And we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.